started here. So again, welcome everyone to the Introduction to Systems Thinking event. My name is Yasmin, and alongside my colleague, Josh Coachster, we're going to host and facilitate today's session on behalf of the SI London Hub. This session is being recorded and it's going to be 90 minutes long. So yes, hope you're going to enjoy this session as much as we do. Normally, it's always a great session having you here on Wednesdays. So this is part of the SI learning series that the London Hub is organizing. And this is the Introduction to Systems Thinking, the second module of this series, where you're going to introduce the topic of systems thinking, giving you some basic fundamental ideas. And we want this session to be an interactive one. So you're more than welcome to use the chat to address any questions or any comments that you would like. And if you want to learn more about the SI learning series, you have the link here. You're going to have more details on the whole series that we're organizing and how we're going to do that until June. So if you have any questions or anything, you can address afterwards, and I'm more than happy to answer them. All right. So before we start, I wanted to have a moment just to see if you are okay with using the Miro board. And if not, this is going to be a good moment for you to practice. So since this is going to be an interactive session, it's good for you to understand some basic stuff that we're going to be using today. So here on the left-hand side, you have this menu, right? And you can find the sticky note here on, depending on where you have, this is the sticky note here. So you can click on this sticky note and just drag your mouse to the center of this square. And I would like to know where you're joining us from today. So put the name of the city or the country that you are located at the moment, and we can first understand how this Miro board works, and of course, so you see where we are in the world today. So I'm going to put mine here. I am in Portugal at the moment. And of course, you can, if you click on the Miro board, you can make it bigger or smaller, just dragging the sides of the sticky note here. All right. So we have Alberta, Canada. Oh, Rio, Brazil. Great. Germany, London, Nashville, USA, Madrid, Switzerland, Lima. Oh, hello, Luis. Welcome to the session. Awesome. So you have people from everywhere. For the ones that got here a bit later, we are using this square just to practice our understanding of the Miro board. So you just click here on the left-hand side on the sticky note and just drag to the center of this box so we can know where you are in the world tonight. We have Argentina, London, Europe, Bangalore, India. Awesome. Great. And of course, if you want to use the chat, feel welcome to do so. We're going to address some questions as we go along. But that's it for now. Do we have any questions so far? Any comments, anything?
No comments or questions. Lots of people joining us, maybe 50 people already.
Yes, okay.
I actually have a question. Mine note is incredibly small and I can't get it to suddenly and I cannot get any grab on it. Any specific way to do it with the keyboard to enlarge it?
So you're talking about the mirror board, what we're looking at the moment?
Yeah, the one that's right here where my name is, Pedro.
Yeah.
There is a tiny note in there.
Oh, I think
I can't enlarge it.
Here. Oh, if you
Weird.
click on the mirror, on the sticky note, you have these 4 points on each one of the...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And you can just drag it like that.
Well, it seems to want to do a line in those ones, see?
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah, all right.
So anyway, it says Burlington.
Yes, great. All right, no worries.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, if you prefer to use the chat as we go along as well, feel free to do so. Okay, we're going to keep an eye on that as well. We have some tiny ones here, but I think, oh, okay, good. Awesome.
You can also use the text box on the third down on the toolbar on the left.
Yes. All right. So we have Colombia, South Africa. Great. We are very international in here. That's very good. So we can get started with our session now that we understood a bit more about where you are. We can jump into our session, and yeah, if you have any questions, please use the chat. All right. So we're going to this first box here on the second line, and I would like to know, what do you see in this image so we can get started? What can you see here in this image? So in the same way, you can click on the sticky notes or on the text and put here so we can see, what do you see? I'm going to put 1.5 minutes so we can give time for everyone to post. Awesome. So let's see what we have here. We have an ecosystem, maybe an ecosystem, energy, calm, lack of humans. All right. A forest, sunshine, joy, harmony, nature, life, sunrise in a forest, systems, forestry, sun, shadows, calm serenity. So you can see a lot of things, right? Great. So,
I guess
yeah.
that's kind of
Yes.
speaking to one of the themes today about different perspectives, right? And how systems thinking helps us to see from and integrate different perspectives.
Exactly. So we have a lot of different ways of looking at this image, right? And that's going to be a very important point. So I wanted to raise this this quote here, that systems thinkers can see both the forest and the trees, right? One eye on each. And here, of course, we can see the forest, we can see the leaves, we can see the sunshine. We can see a lot of things here, but we can see as well the forest as a whole. And that's a very important, let's say, dynamic for us to understand from this image, since the forest are part of the context that we're seeing here, the forest, right? But the forest and the sunshines and the leaves are part of what we understand as the forest. And vice versa, we can understand the forest as a whole that comprehends all these different elements, right? And much more. So I'm going to pass it to this quick exercise here, because as we've seen that, we can see the elements that constitute the forest, but the forest itself. So if you join me on this third box here, I would like you to see if you can see these scenarios in a different way, in the same way that we can see just the trees and the leaves. We can see what else this is a part of, right? So in the same way, you can put your sticky notes here and identify the whole that these things are a part of. So several cars on a street. This is part of what else can it be part of, rather than just separate cars in the street or people walking around in a big center. What else can we see from that?
So it's about trying to reflect on the system that these parts form part of and share that.
Yes. I'm going to put some 1.5 minutes again. Awesome. So what do we have here? Diverse of bottles in a shelf can be a bar, a pharmacy, supermarket, an alcoholic who needs help. Could be. Animals running around freely. The movie Madagascar, wildlife, jungle, national park. We have this one, fishes in a container of water. think that's a good one because someone put here lunch, and I didn't consider that before. Aquarium, a fish market. So yeah, here you can see that depending on how you look at things, and of course how you understand the interconnection of these elements, you see the system they are part of as a different one, right? So I am vegetarian. I don't eat fish, for example. So in this context here, lunch wasn't part of something that I thought about when I wrote this one, right? People walking around in a big center can be protest, tourists, the walking track, flea market. So we understand things through our perspective as well, right? And this is a very important point here. Very good. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to pass it to Joss to explain a bit more about these ideas.
Thanks, Yasmin. I'll just grab the screen for a minute. So good to see everyone here. And yeah, we're back to learn about systems thinking. And we touched upon a few kind of core ideas there already, different perspectives and holism, looking at the whole or looking at the parts. And I think particularly that interrelationship between the two. In any complex system, you have both the parts and they're interrelated and interdependent in forming some overall system. And being able to see on both levels is really core to being a systems thinker. Being able to see the forest, not just the trees, and actually being able to see both and how the parts interrelate to form the whole. And this gets to the ideas of analytical and synthetic or holistic thinking. And that with systems thinking, we're really looking for a balance between these two so that we can gain a more comprehensive understanding of the world around us and the complex systems we form part of. So just to kind of expand upon that a little bit, analytical thinking, maybe you've heard of this. It's a mode of inquiry where we focus on the parts of the system and trying to gain an understanding of those parts and their properties. And it often leads to a detailed description of things, particularly of their internal workings, because we're often narrowing down our vision to really understand what's going on within a particular area. So it reduces down by focusing only on the most important parts and creating a detailed description of their properties. And we'll look at examples now in a minute. But there's another, and that's very good for many things. It obviously tells us how systems work and gives us a detailed understanding of things. But there's another mode of reasoning where we're expanding outwards to try and see the whole, that those parts are interrelated within, and the function of those parts within that broader system. We call this synthetic thinking or holistic thinking. It's about putting the parts together to see what emerges, what's the whole that forms. And it starts by looking at the whole and tries to understand how the parts interrelate and function within that broader context. So the word context I find really important here and interesting because it's a way of applying this thinking. If you look at anything and then just ask yourself the question of what's the context surrounding that thing. So the analytical approach always focuses on the thing itself, whereas the holistic approach always asks us to step back a little bit and say, wait a sec, what is the context that this element or this system is part of, the environment, the whole, should we say, and that's synthetic thinking, it's reasoning upwards. Maybe we stay going, Yasmin? I've got the screen, haven't I? Okay, I'll stay going. So why we're talking about systems change and systems innovation in this series, and why is it so important in that context? Well, here's a really interesting quote from Russell Ackoff, who's a famous thinker, systems thinker and management management theorist back in the 20th century. And he had this to say: successful problem solving requires finding the right solution to the right problem. We fail more often because we solve the wrong problem than because we get the wrong solution to the right problem. So he's saying there's kind of two levels here, actually. There's the whole and the parts in some sense. And the whole is about, if we don't step back and look at the whole, we're not really going to know what's the right problem to solve. If we straight away narrow our vision down, so it's getting to it down here, this is often the way we work. We have a particular tool, a particular approach, a method for solving things. And whenever we find a problem, we go about applying that method. And it's kind of a linear approach to addressing problems. But the issue with that is we don't actually know if we're solving the right problem in the right way, as Russ Blackoff is saying. We have to kind of step back and look at the whole and understand a bit about the system itself if we're going to find the right way, the right approach to solve the right problem. We're going to find the right problem to solve. And that's what system thinking is going to help us with here. So if we have an issue like homelessness or poverty or hunger or whatever it is, there's always maybe you've heard that quote, there's always a simple answer to a complex problem that's simple and wrong. So for homelessness or poverty, it might look, oh, well, they haven't got homes or they haven't got food or whatever it is. That's the immediate solution or immediate problem. But if we step back, we might see actually this is part of a broader system and a whole network of interrelated things. And we need to find these intervention points across that network, across that broader system, and then make changes there. So that we can actually be solving the right problems in the right way, instead of just addressing the immediate problem with kind of methods that we already have. So it's kind of setting us up on the right pathway, this system thinking, as opposed to the analytical thinking, which is going to narrow our thinking down and focus it on the immediate solutions to this problem, which doesn't really work in complex challenges. We solve it temporarily, then it comes back again because we haven't actually dealt with the system. So it's why systems thinking is so important in the context of systems change.
Exactly. So building on this idea that Joss is talking about, here we have some scenarios, right? Some contexts. And I would like you to get one of these dots here and identify which one of these contexts do you think is the most useful to use the systems thinking approach. So you can just click on one of these dots and then drag them to the ones that you think systems thinking could be a good approach to looking at these contexts. Okay, I'm going to put
just one dot each, or?
Yeah, it can be one dot each, yes. So I'm going to put here 1 minute. One for each, one for each context. So you can use, as many as you want, but one for each. But let's come here and see which ones did you use. So I see a pattern of people joining and leaving a specific job position. Can maybe one person tell me, why do you think systems thinking is a good perspective to use here? Someone who put on this one.
I can do that if you want to.
Yes, please.
Well, there could be many reasons why this is happening, you know, and an organization is a complex system in which people, parts, and the whole has, you know, goals of themselves. So we need to understand what that position that people are feeling and seeing, instead of just going after them, assuming that they are the problem. So here we need to look at many things going around, you know, salary, dynamics with their colleagues, the culture of the organization, you know, or name a few. So there is a lot of things to be considered here. So we need to look at the big picture.
Great, yes. Yeah, as you said, right, instead of just looking at one specific thing, you see here a pattern, right, of people joining and leaving. So maybe there's a lot of things going on for this pattern to be occurring, right? We have another one here. Let's say I see an issue with poverty rising in my community. Another one on this one. Someone would like to explain why systems thinking could be a good perspective here. No. Yeah, so we have here in the comment to consider the whole structure behind the happening. Right, exactly. Since, for example, as Joss mentioned before, poverty, you know, it's not just about housing, it's not just about money, right? There's a lot of things happening for that to be an issue, and then for that to be happening in several parts of the world and in different ways. So this is a very good scenario for us to be considering using systems thinking to see more than just the simple way of understanding this issue, right? So a very important word here that it's a very useful one in this context of systems thinking is paradigm. And I would like to just go to the section below for you to tell me, what is a paradigm? Have you thought about that before? Why is a paradigm important in this context? You can use the chat, or you can put the sticky notes here, but this is an important thing to consider when talking about systems thinking. So maybe one minute for you to post some stickies here, and we are going to talk a bit more on these ideas very soon. I'll put 1 minute.
Yeah, just so everyone finds it, we're now on the third line down here. So if you zoom out, you'll be able to see where we are, and then zoom back into the start of the third line.
Great. So let's see some ideas that you put here. A model to make sense of a concept, a way of thinking. It's an approach or the doing something. Way of thinking, model or framework. Way of looking and understanding the world. What is good and bad. So yeah, some ideas here, right? A paradigm is a way of looking at the world, and it's a way of understanding the context that we have in front of us, right? So systems thinking is a paradigm, is a lens that we use to see the challenges that we face and to see things in a different way, right? And I'll pass it now to Josh to build upon this idea a bit further.
Great, thank you. So here we are. Paradigm is, I might say, a worldview. It's a way of looking at the world. The term rose to prominence during the 20th century with Karl Popper and his identification of different scientific paradigms and how the scientific community seemed to develop a certain consensus about how to see the world. For example, physicists with the Newtonian paradigm, and they all worked within that kind of mental model, that established way of looking at the world for a very long time, until it eventually became disrupted by Einstein's worldview, his general relativity, which introduced a whole new paradigm. And then people started working within that paradigm, those new consensus about how to look at the world. It's very interesting to study scientific communities in that way, and how those paradigms become challenged and how they become disrupted and destabilized and eventually end up in crisis. And we saw the rise of a new way of looking at the world with general relativity and so forth. So that happens all across pretty much every system, right? Every system we're interested in is ultimately created by human beings and by our understanding of the world. And our guide on systems awareness really that our mental models, our paradigm really shapes the world we live in, and being able to understand that is really key to being able to understand the systems we create, where those problems come from, and how we create those problems, right? That's part of wicked problems, that pretty much all of them are created by us. They're created by our way of looking at the world, our way of managing, and so forth. And that's why paradigms are really key to systems change. But we're just going to stay expanding a bit more on the systems paradigm. So again, it's this difference between the analytical and synthetic thinking. And they are paradigms, right? They're both, if we take this thing of the bicycle, looking at this bicycle, we really can look at it in two very different ways. The analytical approach would, take it to pieces and study all those parts and see how all those parts work. It would reduce down to create an account of the whole with reference to a combination of the basic building blocks. Right? So we saw that in physics, right? They're trying to understand the world in terms of these basic atoms and so forth. And it's kind of a reductionist paradigm, that approach. It's good for understanding how, understanding the internal workings, increasing efficiency of parts, and incremental improvements. Right? So if we really understand those parts, we can try and tweak them, we can try and make them better, we can try and improve them. But an interesting point is that it's never going to actually change the system. If we're always focusing our attention on improving the wheels or the chain or the handlebars, we lose sight of the system that is the bicycle. And more importantly, we lose sight of the context, that bicycle in that broader context, the transport system. And there comes a time, well, I'll just say that's fine, as long as the context doesn't change, right? This bike was created for a particular transport system, and it's probably fine. We can go on tweaking and improving it as long as that overall environment doesn't change, right? Consumer demands and urban environment and so forth, other transport elements don't change, and it's fine. But what happens when that overall context changes? Going on improving the parts is actually not going to help us. It's going to lead us in the wrong direction. It leads us into crisis, actually. And we've seen that in many organizations, right? Or that phrase about the Titanic, and we're shifting the deck chairs when this thing's about to run into a big iceberg, because everyone's, thinking about their deck chair and they're not actually looking out to what's going on. So here we're saying sometimes, well, quite often, we need both of these modes of inquiry, but particularly when the world out there changes, and we need to change the system, not just the parts. We need to be looking upwards and outwards and saying, what's going on out there? And how is this system still relevant and still functional within that broader context, or do we need to change it? And that's where the holistic thinking is really going to help us. It's really going to become necessary. And of course, we live in a world of transition, of change, of systemic changes. And that's why this is really rising to prominence, or part of why more holistic modes of looking at the world and organizing are rising to prominence, because we need to make some big changes. We really need to question the systems we've developed, right? And no longer improve or tweak them or whatever it is. We need to change that paradigm. We need to change that system. We really need to understand the environment, to understand what's needed in this new world, what's possible in this new world. I'd say education is a good example, right? We know the world of work and technology and what's needed there is radically changing. But our system is kind of matched for a world of the past. It's working for a world of the past. So it's an example of where we really need to question the whole paradigm of how we do education if we're going to make it relevant for this new world. And we need to look at that broader context of the world of work and how technology is changing and the economy is changing and so forth, and then step back and say, what's the system that's really needed to be functional in that new context? So,
well, there's a comment here. All those parts are networked. It's not hard for me to believe that you can drive system level change by changing a part.
It's not hard for me to believe that you can drive system level change by changing a part. Maybe you could share an example of that. You can potentially change other parts by influencing one part. Are you really going to change the whole pattern of organization? When we say a system, we're really talking about a pattern of organization and how the whole thing works.
I can easily believe that would be true. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have an example? If the context was right.
I'll give you an example. I once asked somebody who was doing development work in a country in Africa, what's the best way to improve life for people? And she said, if it were up to me, everybody in this country would have a functioning 8th grade education, period. And her idea was that if that were true, that would drive unpredictable but positive change throughout the entire population. And I don't have any reason to think otherwise, that she was probably right about that. You're changing a part, you drive change in the whole system. I have no problem believing that.
Yeah, but you'd have to question whether the reason education has that transformative potential.
Oh, that's a separate question. That is true. That's a very interesting question, but she's still right.
Yeah, if you change the thinking, is what we're saying. If we change people's thinking, then that would result in the emergence of a new system, for sure. Yeah, I think that's what she's saying. Yeah. So, yeah, I think we've kind of covered this aspect, right? Analytical thinking versus holistic thinking. And analytical thinking is reducing our vision down to focusing on an individual part. And the holistic thinking is helping us to step back and question the broader pattern of interrelationships and the way the whole thing is organized, and gain that broader view of what's going on here. So it's also, you can see here, a networked kind of way of looking at systems, which is a very different one to understanding those individual parts primarily. Again, these are paradigms, right? A networked view of the world is a relational paradigm. It's looking at the world in terms of relationships, and from that, and context, right? Those relationships form the context. and new ways of actually influencing and changing that system from it. We in the right-hand side here, we'd start thinking about how can we start to reorganize that pattern of relationships and influence that pattern of relationships. Whereas on the left-hand side, if we focus on one of the parts, we might think about how to just influence that part itself in isolation, a more direct, linear way of trying to make change happen. As opposed to on the right, we might think about the broader context, broader set of relationships and how we can influence that part potentially through changing and influencing those connections in the broader relationship. So it's a different way of looking at the world, and from that follows a different way of organizing, a different way of relating to systems, and a different way of trying to change them, which is what systems change is about. And yeah, this gets to the systems awareness we were talking about, that it's really kind of based on a different level of awareness, a different way of looking at the world in terms of our place in the world and how we relate to other things, right? Ecosystem thinking is looking at the world in relation to ourselves. And it's asking, you know, how are those things related to me, and seeing them in that way. And it results in quite a piecemeal kind of fractured view of the world. Everything is interrelated around you, as opposed to this ecosystem thinking, which is more about understanding ourselves as part of systems, as part of complex adaptive systems, interdependent with all those other elements. And that, again, is a very different way of looking at the world. We see ourselves as more interdependent with systems. We can start to understand that things that go on over here can affect other things, and can ultimately feed back to us, and it creates these feedback loops and interdependence and so forth. It's a much more dynamic kind of way of looking at the world. Pedro, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, actually, it's a system. I mean, in a paradigm, we can see it, for example, in simple ways, that thinking of the brain as a computer. So we invented computers and we put the paradigm that we are mimicking the process of the brain. And that drove a number of years of research where they view things with that model, trying essentially formulated the hypothesis and the interpretations. Is the new results and inconsistencies essentially started to break that paradigm, and new relationships, new system grows out of it. I think the system, we are naturally inclined to build systems, just the complexity of life itself. But the worldview defines what connections we are going to make or favor. And therefore, a paradigm shift will change the way we see the world, and that starts changing the priority to the connection between components in the system.
Certainly, certainly. You start contextualizing things differently. I think that's one way of putting it. When we say context, what we really mean is that interrelationship of things, interrelationships. You start looking at something, whether it's this rabbit or this car or this tree, in one paradigm, you look at it in one way and you make one set of connections, and you shift it into another paradigm and you make another set of connections, exactly as you say. And then from that derives whole new insights, whole new, ways of organizing, being and designing and so forth. Exactly as you say. Yeah. Okay, Yasmin.
Good. So with all that in mind, I would ask you to put here the main ideas that you got from the importance of talking about the paradigm and the shifting of a paradigm. How do you think it is important for us to have at least consider different ways of looking at things? So you can put your stickies here so we can see how you understood this idea. I'll put 1 minute again. Okay, let's see. If we don't look at the whole and the interactions of the parts, most of our actions will be blind and bring unintended consequences. Good. Important to support sustainable change. This is not going to be overnight, as this is a very slow process. It's a culture issue. Importance and difficulty of being able to see your own context in order to make those changes, right? And this is going to, well, these reflections are very important for the next session now that we're going to talk about this awareness, the system awareness. And I will share my screen again. So I will talk to you about this very important story, let's say, that represents the importance of considering different perspectives and how important it is to bring people together, right, to really understand a specific challenge or a specific phenomena. So this is the story of the elephant and the blind man. And in here, several blind men that didn't know about elephants or didn't learn about elephants before, they come to try to learn about it. And each one of them, they touch on specific parts of this elephant. So one touches the trunk, the other one touches the tail, the other one touches the paw, and so on. And in the end, when they try to explain what an elephant is, each one of them described the elephant in their own perspective. So, for example, the person that was touching the trunk, they probably described the elephant as something, let's say, long and a bit squidgy and soft. And the person, for example, that was touching more of the paw got the characteristics of the elephant being something hard or something thick, right? And it's the elephant, it's in fact each one of these things, but a lot more than that. And trying to describe the elephant just by each one of these perspectives, it's not going to give the whole idea of what the reality, right, of this phenomenon that is the elephant. So this is a very important learning to get from this story, is that each one of us is going to understand something through our own perspective and through our own ways of looking at things. But in reality, it's important to bring all these perspectives together in order to get a more accurate description and understanding of what we are touching on, right, and what we are understanding. So I wanted to have an exercise here quickly for you to understand this in a very practical way, but very quickly. So let's say that the elephant that we're trying to understand here is obesity in the US, for example, right? And we have different actors involved, and each one of these actors are going to bring their own perspective to understanding this issue, right? This elephant that we have in the middle. So I would like you to post some of the actors that you think are involved in this issue. And I'm going to ask one or two people to explain these perspectives, right? We are going to choose one or two actors for you to explain what is their way of looking at this elephant, let's say the obesity. So pose here some of the actors that you think are involved in this challenge. For example, the food industry or family or social media or something like that. And I will ask one or two people to explain a bit more of this idea. Okay, I'm going to put 1 minute again. Awesome. So let's see some actors here. We have public health services, education, genetics, those who design and run medicine courses, food industry, supermarkets, poverty, food regulations. So I would ask the person that put here, let's say, food industry, to tell me, how do you think this actor, the food industry, would look at this issue of the obesity in the US?
Yeah, I put that there. I don't think that they feel that it's a particular problem because their focus is profit and not health. And therefore, their emphasis is on minimizing the cost of a food or a recipe or a ready meal, and making it as attractive and as viable as possible. So within the guidelines, they want to drive as close as possible, and it is not their natural incentive or profit incentive to make the food more healthful.
Great, thank you, Michael. Yeah, this is one way of looking at this elephant, right? And would that be the same perspective as, let's say, education? Who was the person that put education here? And how would education or educational system would look at this issue of obesity in the US? Someone? No? Maybe another person would like to comment on another actor here, not the food industry.
I can comment on education in part. Both education is a world in which for the longest time, obesity was not of any importance or considered an issue of discussion, was just as essentially, that's just the way it was. And even the food that was given and so on wasn't really thought about. As a teacher, I have seen that in our own cafeterias, where we start teaching about obesity and we're talking about sugar and so on. And then what do we sell in the cafeteria? Well, we sell essentially those products that will actually promote an unhealthy diet in a lot of young people. So I think education is at this point in a sort of at the edge, at the sharp edge of a knife, sitting, not really being effective one way or the other to deal with the issue of obesity and to discuss the issue. It's not easy to discuss when it comes to young people, particularly young people.
Yeah, certainly not right. And if we understand all these other actors, we are going to see that they have different ways of looking at this challenge, let's say, and they're going to do things differently depending on how they came to be, right, and their intentions. So this leads us to this next session here. We'll talk about some ideas on this aspect.
Yeah, so going back to the idea of, well, it's in the systems awareness guide, if you're interested in this, the whole reflexive thinking about the way that our mental models, our way of looking at the world, shapes our way of, our mental models shape our way of looking at the world, but then shapes how we go about designing and managing the world, which ultimately creates the world we live in. And there is this kind of feedback loop going on where then people go and act in that world, they grow up in that world, and they adapt and respond to it, which then self-perpetuates itself in that way. We grow up in a world, modern industrial economies, many of us, which are shaped by a certain set of principles in our education, but then when we go into the workforce and economy and so forth, and we're imbued with them, so then we perpetuate those mental models. Again, like the scientific community is a very good one, right? If you want to be a scientist, you're going to have to go to university, you're going to be taught about all of this paradigm, and then you'll take that and apply that, and as a PhD student, build research based upon it. So those mental models perpetuate themselves, and that's an aspect of a paradigm creating the world we live in, and of course why it's so difficult to actually change them. And also we can probably note that these paradigms, they're almost all-encompassing ways of looking at the world, right? The Newtonian paradigm gave us a description of the physical world in absolute time-space coordinates, but then Einstein came along and gave a whole different view of the world. So actually that creates massive dissonance, massive conflict actually, and why it's very challenging to really change paradigms, because it requires this kind of flip, this big jump into a new world. It's not an incremental change. It's a more transformative kind of change. Maybe we stay going. Yasmin, what's the next slide? And yeah, this again is kind of reinforcing that if that's the way. If we understand that reflexive thinking, that our ways of thinking and looking at the world are really creating the world, well, then when it comes to systems innovation, systems change, that's inevitably going to require a change in us, a change in our way of thinking. And I think it was Louise who just put a message in the chat saying, we as a whole do the thinking. The brain for itself does nothing, right? So I think people are getting the idea that this is more than just thinking. It's actually our way of being, it's our way of relating to the world and so forth. And really to change our paradigm is a change in our being, like we showed it there. The difference between ecosystem and ecosystem thinking is more than just thinking. It's our kind of way of showing up in the world. So if we really want to change a system, we're going to be changing ourselves also.
Hey, Josh, how will AI affect anything?
Yeah, well, let's see. Hopefully it will help us better understand and better manage complex systems. I think that's the best we could hope for. It could also go in many other ways, and I'm sure it will unfold in many different ways, Brad. I think it's maybe another conversation. We should maybe organize an event around that at some stage. Should we stay going?
I'll be looking for the next course, my friend.
Okay.
Good. So here I'd like to hear from you. If you can share one example of the way your mental models shape the way that you think you look at the world. So I think one example that I've mentioned before, when talking about the fish in a container full of water, someone said lunch, right? and I didn't think about it. So my way of doing things in the world are going to, well, my way of being is going to be is going to shape the way that I look and do the things in the world, right? So I would like to give you a moment to think about examples, and if you can identify how the way that you are shapes the way that you look at a specific thing, maybe something that happened to you recently or something that you can think about now. So a specific context that you would like to share with us. And I'll put here 1 minute and then we can discuss. Great. Let's see what we have here. In my culture, it was normal to get married and then after have children. Now the youth do the opposite. Would you like to?
Culture.
Yes. Yes, just.
Well, I'd just say culture is are really examples, very pure examples of paradigms. And I always remember a friend I had in Asia, a Chinese friend who was, when she talked about her future, it was really about the role she was going to play in society and her family. And when I would talk to her, it was more about, creating your own future and, a much more individualistic way of looking at it, whereas hers was all about being part of kind of fitting in and developing and maintaining kind of pre-existing social structures that was her role. And you could see just two different kind of worldviews there. And actually, it was quite difficult to talk to each other when you have that kind of fundamental difference in paradigm.
Great, yeah. Yeah, culture is definitely a big one. The person that wrote this one would like to explain a bit more about that.
It's me. I am Italian, and in our culture, it was normal to get married and then have children. But now we have people who have children and then maybe they get married. Okay, it is funny. It's different. It's a completely change of. For people of my age. I mean, there's nothing good or wrong. It's just a shift, okay?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, the culture that we embedded in.
Yeah, the culture is a big issue.
Yes. Yes, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
We have some other ones, treat others as they want to be treated, always wanted to problem so further. People are generally good.
Hey, Yasmin, how can you use mental models to I don't want to say adjust personal bias? Because living in America, I'm in a mix. My wife is from Nigeria and I'm white, and there's a lot of inherent racism out there that is starting to rear its ugly head here in the States and other places. And
in order to, one of the things I'm doing is helping to build a better way for my children for decision making. And is there ways that we can use mental models to help shape our, to shape biasness and how one sees the world, or how the world sees them?
Well, it's trying to, you know, expose people to new narratives, right, and new ways of looking at the world generally, to influence them. We also had a really interesting popular post we put out a while back from Cultural Hacker. It's an organization in Germany that looks at if someone has a particular belief that we usually don't like to be challenged, you know, directly on particular things we say or particular beliefs. But if you can actually start to understand what's the whole context out of which they're saying that or believing that, and then think about the associated factors to that, right? It's like a network. And then how can you start to maybe influence those associated supporting factors that are leading to that belief? Is just one example.
If I may add to that, George, my understanding of mental models, which as you alluded to, is deep beliefs in every one of us as individuals, influenced by education, our upbringing, our families. In my view, personally, I think the better way is not to try and change the different mental models in every one of us. Perhaps it's probably a better way to help each other understand the different mental models and the assumptions, and then come to an understanding of what positive things that we can, achieve together. Because to change another person's mental model is not easy. So I rather work towards first understanding the different mental models, and then perhaps understand each other from, even if it's a different perspective.
Yeah, and this is why we discuss, why we have conversations as human beings and spend so much time doing that. Throughout society, right, paradigms are changing all the time. And that's happening through all sorts of kind of parallel conversations and discussions and new ideas that are being introduced and, negotiations around meaning and so forth. So it is happening all around us, and it happens through us having conversations and being introduced to new ideas and exposed to those and negotiating our sense of meaning over time. So it's culture, really, right? It's how our culture is evolving kind of continuously, and that's happened massively right at the moment. We're going through big transformations, and we're trying to make sense of all of that and new ways of thinking. Maybe Louise, quickly, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I was thinking about what just been said about changing others' mindsets. It's not particularly about that, because I don't want to change you. I just want to make you let you know that there are other ways of looking at things. And pursuing system thinking is just a way of doing so, because then you realize you have to look at the whole, and that there are many readings of people as people are, from the readings of the reality as people are. That's it. Then it's up to you if you change or not. It's not like being taught. You need to learn. It's up to you. But at least open your mind to the whole, and having a different point of view that there exists, and those are rich, that you need to consider. I think that's a good step forward.
Yeah. Yes, I just shared a quote with Yasmin yesterday about, you can't actually really teach people something new. They have to experience it for themselves. They have to bump up against reality. So ultimately, that's the best way of doing it, right? Helping people to experience the reality of the world we live in.
Exactly.
But that's it, making sure that, like, I want to say, maybe I live in Northern Virginia, which is a bubble, and making sure that people are, you know, when my children come into another part of the country, you know, I have to make sure, like what you're saying, we're not into changing other people's personal biases and beliefs, but just making sure that they understand when they are introduced into another situation, that they are aware of their surroundings and people think differently of them, right?
Yep, exactly. Okay, let's stay going for the sake of time. We're coming to the end here. Just to jump into a little bit of the kind of workings of systems thinking, should we say? It's not magic. We can't go into all of this. It's in the guide on system thinking on our website. But it's just a bit about, some of the mental models, some of the concepts. Maybe we could zoom in slightly, Yasmin, to get a better view of how we kind of shift our thinking, right? And these are all kind of looking at the same thing, ultimately, you know, the difference between the whole and the parts and analytical versus synthetic thinking. But we can see, firstly there, about shifting from the parts to looking at the whole, from shifting from a reductionist way of looking at the world, kind of breaking things down, to this idea of emergence, where small parts come together and form patterns that ultimately result in new ways of seeing new patterns of organization. Should I just grab my screen, Yasmin? Yeah, 1 second.
Okay.
So here we go. Oh, you got it. Okay, I'll do it here. Okay, so just a few dimensions of systems thinking, as I say, shifting from a piecemeal view of the world to a more holistic, shifting this kind of reductionist way to this small parts coming together to form new patterns of organization, shifting from a linear cause and effect view of the world. Maybe you've heard about that, to this non-linear cyclical feedback way of looking at the world, where of interdependence is really kind of a key concept behind this. And then we mentioned it a few times, this relational networked way of looking at the world, moving away from a isolated or separate or bounded view of the world, where we're focusing on the disconnected parts, to thinking about the networks of relationships between them. So that's that. The guide kind of goes into goes into different dimensions of that. We have a canvas around it also, so you can use this as a workshop to help other people work through this. And you could apply this in any context, right? Thinking about cities, thinking about, we talked about education, or it could be about the future of whatever it is, supply chains or finance. You could think through this, and it would help people to really shift from this kind of reductionist perspective to a more systems approach. So tools to explore thinking differently. The iceberg model we have here. Hopefully you've heard of this already. It's quite popular and well known. Michael's just looking for the template there, Yasmin, if you might find it for him, the systems thinking canvas.
I'll post that one. And just to let you know that we're going to expand more of these tools aspect on our next session. So some of these ideas that you're talking here about mental models and everything, we're going to expand on next week's session. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, just quickly to touch upon this graphic, maybe you've seen it. It's a very popular one we have that's been shared and viewed many times, and you know why we need this holistic perspective, because systems aren't just what we see above the ground. They're what goes on, the dark matter, some people call it, behind the scenes. If you think about, if you walk around a city, like, you won't see a lot of what actually shapes that city, how the flows of money all around you, and finance and economics, and you won't see the kind of policies and regulation, you won't see the mental models, and you won't see the history, you won't see the incentives, so on and so forth. But that's really what's going on underneath the hood and is really shaping the systems around us. So this is alluding to the idea of the iceberg model, that most of what's going on is below the surface of the water. When we just see the outcomes of the system, the events, that's just a little fraction of what's going on. And we really need to take a holistic approach to address these factors down here, which is what systems change is all about, addressing all of those. So we're really able to shift the system instead of fixing problems. And the iceberg model helps us to think about different levels so that we can start going down to the most fundamental levels, where the mental models are, where the patterns and structures that we really need to change up.
Yeah, so here, just to have an understanding on if you know much about this tool or not, so just drag one of these stickies here. Are you familiar with that? Have you heard about the iceberg module before? Or no, this is something very, very new. Just quickly, so we can briefly touch on the iceberg model, and then, yes, as I said, next week we're going to expand more on this idea. We have a few no's, we have a lot of yeses. Some people know more or less, heard about it, but don't know exactly how it is.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. Great. So yeah, on the website. So yes, we're going to be using this tool next time, isn't it, Yasmin, for our workshop? Is that a week or 2 weeks from now? It's a week away, is it?
Yes, next week, yes.
Okay, great. So we'll talk more then, but yeah, the iceberg model is the idea that, like an iceberg, most of what we see with the iceberg is just the tip above the water, right? It's the events we see, the outcomes to the system, what we see in the news in the evening about an oil spill here, or this CEO getting fired, or whatever it may be. You know, the hurricane in the particular area, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath that are actual systems, structure and mental models that are actually creating those patterns and those events over time. And simply by reacting to these events, these outcomes, we can only temporarily fix things by responding to patterns, which are trends over time. So we keep on seeing the reoccurrence of, you know, more hurricanes or whatever it is. That's a pattern, and we can start plan to kind of respond to that. But that's a lot of where traditional approaches to management and policy making lie. The real systemic stuff is down at the bottom, thinking about the underlying structures that support that. And then, as we've talked a lot about today, these mental models. And the idea is that if you change those mental models, that's kind of the highest leverage point for changing systems. Many examples of this you could give, but maybe smoking is maybe one example, because I do believe big things are changing in terms of mental models around smoking. Particularly, I'm not sure globally, but particularly in developed economies, we can see a shift from a paradigm where smoking was kind of a cool thing. Definitely 50 years ago or so, it was very cool. Nowadays, it's not so cool. So actually the mental models changed that. But we know for a long time, we tried to prevent smoking. And maybe, I'm not sure how well it worked, but we were kind of operating in a paradigm that was fighting against it, because it was still kind of a cool thing to do. And we saw these cool people on film smoking television, smoking cigarettes. And we were telling young people not to smoke. But the system was set up to stay creating that outcome, and we didn't get very far. But now it's starting to change, right? It's starting to be not so cool. And that then sets the system up, that change in paradigm, change in thinking really sets the system up for real system change, for things to really start changing. We might talk about the whole rise of sustainability and that paradigm, and how that's kind of moving to the forefront as setting the context for really this system's change once that mental model starts changing and the deep structures start changing. So that's the iceberg model. We'll be looking at it next week.
Great, everyone. So we got to the end of our session, and these are the main points that we covered here today. So just for you to understand what is systems thinking, the importance of using this paradigm, the difference between holistic and analytical thinking, and yeah, how you both are useful and in different contexts, right? And right now we touched the idea behind the iceberg model, but as I said, next week we're going to talk about tools, and this is a very important one that we are going to share with you. So thank you very much for attending today, and I would like to have you post here some 3 main takeaways that you got from this session. So 3 main points that you think were very useful for you, and maybe the ways that you're going to use that in your own journey, in your own work, in your own life. So feel free to post these ones here, and we're always happy to hear from you. Yeah, how the session went and how did you get these ideas. So do you have any final comments or any final questions that you'd like to address before we close this session today? If you have, you can use the chat as well, or unmute yourself so you can address them. No, everything's clear. You got everything from this session. So put thumbs up if you got very good understanding of the concepts today. It can be virtual or it can be just your own thumbs. Okay. Awesome. Yes. Maria Laura, Dana. Yes.
Perhaps just one last comment or question. I'm not sure, but I keep hearing when we talk about systems thinking, more than not, people always talk about complex problems. Is that what about simple problems?
Yeah, so a lot of simple problems are kind of amenable to simple responses. And systems thinking helps us better understand complexity, and then from that be able to better address more complex challenges. So I guess part of the argument is that we're already very good at addressing simple problems, right? That's what reductionism helps us with, and has solved many of the simple problems in our world, right? How to fix toothaches, or how to, get communications like this going, or many others, fix our bicycle and so forth. There are many complex challenges we haven't managed to solve, and systems thinking can really help us with that, because it helps us understand complex systems that are behind those kind of wicked problems.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful session, Joss and Jasmine. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here, everyone. So
thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Joss.
As I said, our next session is going to be on tools. So you have down here the link, so you can click on the top right. So you can join us on the same time, same place.
Same time, same day. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And here you have some other ways that you can find some more information about the London Hub on our website and LinkedIn. We're going to put this recording on YouTube. So here you have the link to the YouTube as well. So Twitter, we're always there. So feel free to join us. And here is some small feedback about the session that you can as well drag the sticky notes and put in this line. How do you think you got the understanding of the concepts today? Was the format of the session effective? And any ideas are always welcome on how we can improve on these sessions. All right. So again, thank you, everyone. And yes,
Can we have access to the mirror in the meantime or not?
Yeah, sure. You can use this link.
Yeah. Okay.
Afterwards.
Thank you, Jasmine.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care and see you all next week with us.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.